It's your boy Luke, here for our DFS fades and sleepers for this week's Genesis Invitational. Here in this video, we're going to be covering some of the most overhyped players this week, my fades, and of course some of the guys being a little bit overlooked, my diamonds in the rough or my sleeper picks. The goal here, of course, is for some of these large field tournaments to help avoid some of the chalky plays that I don't see coming through for you this week, and of course to try and get some of those diamonds in the rough, some of those leverage plays to go and vault yourself up the leaderboard. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right on into it. All right, guys, on the screen, you can see our projections for this week. I'll remind you, this is on the Patreon page, as always being updated. If you're looking for the most up-to-date information, direct access to it, that's how you guys go ahead and access it. Just $8 for the month. Highly recommend it for anybody who hasn't already checked it out. But first off, our first fade for this week, going to be Patrick Cantlay at an even $11,000. And this isn't because he's playing bad, right? Clearly, coming in with the best form in the world. I mean, the guy's had multiple top 10 finishes in a row. The issue is that he's priced among two of my favorite plays on the slate. First and foremost, Jon Rahm, who might be my highest exposed play this week. And of course, Justin Thomas, who's hitting the ball brilliantly himself and is actually a better putter on Poa Nua for his career than Patrick Cantlay. So a lot of the narrative this week, a lot of the reason people want to play at Patrick Cantlay is because of the narrative that he's good on the West Coast. You hear it year in and year out. He always puts his best on this surface. But when we compare the people adjacent to him in the pricing, he's the worst putter up top, right? 0.22 shots gained putting per round on Poa. Jon Rahm gains almost a third of a stroke more. And then down here for Justin Thomas, it's not very much, right? It's very fine margins here, 5/100ths of a shot per round, but it's still a difference, right? And I think a lot of people would have expected it to go the other way. In terms of the profile, how Cantlay's been playing of late, again, we can't really complain. I mean, he's been solid with the approach play, of course, with the off the tee play. He's always one of the best players in the world, but he hasn't really stood out with the around the green. That's something that he typically is one of the better players on tour with. Again, if we zoom out a little bit further, take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, he's a little bit better in that category. But the fact that he's been a little bit below average of late, you saw him last week actually flub a few chips. You're not going to get away with that at Riviera. It's one of the hardest golf courses on tour. You have to be extremely solid at getting up and down. So for that reason, it's also why I have a little bit of a concern with Jon Rahm. The difference is in pedigree. Jon Rahm, at least in my opinion, I think a lot of other people's opinions out there, is head and shoulders better than everyone else in the world. So this $300 difference between Jon Rahm and Cantlay really could have been $1,500 or even $2,000, and I honestly think that would have been fair. Now, I wouldn't be rostering him at $13,000, but if I were making the pricing algorithm, that's exactly where I'd put him. Now, the difference between Cantlay and the rest of the field, this is adequate, right? This $300 difference between Cantlay and Justin Thomas, that makes a whole lot more sense. So that creates a huge amount of opportunity cost with trying to play a Patrick Cantlay when I want to get as much as exposure to a Jon Rahm as humanly possible. And the kicker here is the ownership. Both of them right around 20% projected owned, and might even come in closer to 25 or 26% come the end of the week, which means you really have to pick your shot up top. You can't play both in the same lineup. You certainly can't be over the field on both of them in your player pool, because if you do, you're going to be eliminating this entire 10K range and the top of the 9K range as well, which has some of the best plays on the slate. I mean, I'm talking Dustin Johnson, who we'll talk about a little bit later, Rory McIlroy, who I'm already on record as saying he's a core play for me, or even down here, Hideki Matsuyama, Cameron Smith. All of these are people that I won't be able to fit into my player pool if I'm investing 50 to 60% of my lineups into a Patrick Cantlay. So for that reason, he's going to be a fade for us this week. And I think really the icing on the cake here was the POA numbers we talked about a little bit before. The narrative is certainly there, especially over these last 3 to 4 events. He's played some of his best golf, but historically, that's not necessarily been the case. So could be a little bit of a short-sighted type of narrative that people are buying into at this point. And for that reason, I'll be pivoting elsewhere. All right, guys, our next fade is going to be Collin Morikawa at $10,400, and he's somebody that we haven't seen over here in the States for quite some time. Now, he's played internationally. He did play at Kapalua, but in terms of the shots gained metrics, we have nothing to go off of. Last year, ended up making the cut, didn't really do anything with that performance, even though he gained nearly 10 strokes tee to green, which is excellent for Collin Morikawa, would be excellent for anybody in the world. The issue was the putter. He was absolutely atrocious at this event, and coming off the couch, again, we haven't seen this guy in quite some time. I expect that to be a problem this weekend as well. I mean, first off, for his career, he's a loser with the putter. You can see towards the fall, he started to gain in that category, which despite him not having his best stuff with the ball striking, he was able to get by. Unfortunately, now that he's coming off the couch, I expect him to be at least in the negative with the putter this week, if not pretty atrocious, as per usual with Collin Morikawa. The around the green play is far from his strength for him. You can see he's a loser in that category, and the more of a sample size that we give him, the worse those numbers start to look, right? Negative 15.15 shots gained around the green per round, nearly a quarter loss per round on the greens. Coming off, again, without any type of recent form, that's probably what we can expect from a Collin Morikawa, and if that's going to be the case, he's just overpriced for this field. I want to wait to see him in some type of form to go out and play him, especially when some of our pivots like a Dustin Johnson, a Justin Thomas, or even a Jon Rahm the whole way up top are just so much more quality plays this week. We've seen them. We know they're in form. They also have much better course fits and course history than somebody like a Collin Morikawa. You can see that over here, even with a large sample size, he's right around the middle of the field or even the bottom half of the field in terms of course fit because of his issues with that short game. So not somebody I'm going to be prioritizing this week. The numbers on Poa Anua for his career are not all that much better, especially if at least 13, maybe even 15% of the field are trying to get to him. Next up, our last fade is going to be Viktor Hovland, one of our core plays from last week who did not pan out at $9,400. And a lot of that comes down to ownership. Early in the week, I thought he'd be a leverage play for us, somebody that people weren't actively trying to get back to, but it seems like everybody and anybody thinks they're being big-brained this week by going back to Viktor Hovland. The fact of the matter is, much like a Collin Morikawa, they struggle in the same categories. He's not quite as much of a bad putter, but around the green, Viktor Hovland is one of the worst players on tour. If we take a look at the last 50 measured rounds for Hovland, he's losing 0.86 shots gained around the green per round. That's horrible. That's an issue, right? If he's doing that over 4 rounds, that's nearly 3.5 strokes lost over an event. I mean, that's just not what you're looking for, particularly from some of these guys up top. And at a golf course like Riviera, where you're going to be missing greens in bunches, the green and regulation percentage here is closer to 57%, nearly a whole 18% less than the PGA Tour average. The fairway percentage also extremely low. It's in the 40s. You're gonna have to get up and down. It's something that really distinguishes the field here. It's something we see with the winners at this event are guys that can get up and down. So I have a lot of issues with that. Even from a smaller sample size perspective, I'm still losing pretty significantly around the green, nearly half a stroke per round, and the putting hasn't been in the positive either. So even though he has won internationally, he won at the Hero World Challenge, all of those events without shot link, we know historically that this guy isn't the best around the green player, and unless he brings his perfect stuff this week, I mean, has to be 15 shots gained from tee to green this week, that type of thing, he's not going to win. So I have pivots like a Rory McIlroy, who might be my favorite play on the entire slate. Hideki Matsuyama, a much stronger around the green player, but very similar putter, very similar ball striking numbers as well. So I'd much rather go to Hideki, or especially down to Cameron Smith, one of my other core plays for this week. He's got one of the best up and down games in the game. And if we take a look at his recent metrics, I mean, I talked about this during the Core Picks video, he's hitting the ball just as well as somebody like a Hovland, if not better. I mean, take a look at the last 24 measured rounds. He's better off the tee, and he's better on approach. So if you're telling me that we can get a solid short game player that's hitting it better than Viktor Hovland, that's why I'm trying to make that fade. Let's go ahead and talk about our sleeper picks now. First one going to be Dustin Johnson at $10,200. Now, we hadn't seen him play much. I mean, last time out, he was somebody that was also a sleeper pick for us. And the only reason he was low owned is because we hadn't seen him. And he looked excellent. He was back to the ball striking DJ that we love to see. Unfortunately, he just couldn't buy a putt for his life. But fortunately for DJ, if we take a look at the last 50 measured rounds for him, you can see that he's been gaining putts, gaining with the putter in bunches, gaining over half a stroke per round, 0.62 shots gained putting per round, making him one of the best putters in the world over that stretch. If he can bring the ball striking that we saw last time out, he brings that putter that's been absolute magic ever since he won the Masters. I'm expecting him to go out and win this event. I mean, this is somebody who has elite course history here, somebody I've already put an outright bet on. I already bet Jon Rahm up top, but my only other bet on the board this week is Dustin Johnson. literally just firing those 2 bets, I think one of them goes out and wins this week pretty easily. Because you take a Jon Rahm, it makes it hard to invest elsewhere, right? It's a lot of your bankroll going to that when you're betting somebody that's just 10 to 1 to win the event. But Dustin Johnson, the other horse, I think that could get there. Again, let's look at the shots gained metrics. Like I said, they've looked really good over the last 50 rounds, over the last 24 measured rounds. They haven't been quite as good. Of course, the last time out, he kind of bolstered some of these ball striking numbers. But like I said, over the last 50 measured rounds, even though it hasn't been perfect, he hasn't gone out there and gone to win, still gaining significantly off the tee. On approach, gaining close to a quarter of a stroke per round. And again, the putter's been there. But last time out, we did see him gaining over 2 strokes ball striking in each category, whether it's approach or off the tee. And that gets me extremely excited for this week at Riviera. Next up, we're going to have Will Zalatoris, and I thought he was going to be the highest owned guy on the slate. I have him at least early in the week in my mind before I ran any type of my projections, especially with the ownership. I hadn't projected for like 25-30% ownership. I thought this guy was going to be the chalk of the chalk. Everybody was talking about his ball striking. He's fairly priced for this field. Of anybody in this 8K range, he's by far the best ball striker, and he's somebody who shows up at these hard golf courses. We've seen him at major championships, Augusta National for the Masters. That's a comp course that I'm using for this week. But the fact that he's coming in at just 12.8% expected ownership is ridiculous. I thought this guy was going to be 2, even 3 times that. If you take a look at the last 24 measured rounds, you'll see why I'm excited to play him. Getting over half a stroke gained per round on approach, getting over a quarter of a stroke per round off the tee, and of course the putter hasn't been all that bad. He's just slightly losing in that category. If he goes out and does that same exact thing this week, he's going to go out there and finish in the top 15, top 20 at the very least. If he can find a way to gain a stroke or 2 on the greens, that's when he borderline wins this event and takes home his first championship. So I do like Will Zalatoris at $8,800. I think that a win is coming soon for him. If he wins this week and makes it 4 straight weeks of first-time winners, that would be pretty nuts. Not anybody that I had the stones to go out and bet on my outright card, but for DFS, at less than the 20 to 25% ownership that I expected on him, will be somebody that I'll be investing in quite heavily. And now lastly, the last sleeper pick, and this is the one that could burn us a little bit, but that's why he's a sleeper pick this week. That's Tony Finau at just $8,400, and that doesn't even seem right. I mean, this is somebody who won at the Northern Trust. Everybody wanted to play him. Any chance they got after that, people thought he was really going to break through, start to put up wins in bunches, and he's had a rough stretch, right? And when people break through, that tends to happen from time to time. You lose that focus, you lose that fire for a bit, but I'm sure he's getting tired of missing these cuts. I mean, I'm getting tired of him missing cuts in my lineups. But from a course fit perspective, this is an ideal fit for him. So you can see he's a top 25 course fit down there at $8,400. And if you take a look at the last 50 measured rounds for him, they haven't been all that bad. He's doing his normal thing off the tee and on approach, gaining over half a stroke per round with his ball striking. In fact, actually over 0.6 of a stroke per round with the ball striking. The putter and the around the green are never going to be a huge skill set of his, but around the green historically, he's at least been a gainer. So this losing, even though it's a slight losing number right there, is a little bit surprising to me. If we take a look at the last 24 measured rounds, you can see that's still the case. So maybe that's something that's fallen out. Maybe that's why you've seen him struggle over this fall. But if you take a look at his career numbers, he's gaining over a quarter of a stroke per round around the green. Particularly in 2020, 2021, where he had one of his best seasons ever around the green, he gained over a third of a stroke per round in that category. So I do think that's a little bit of a misleading situation there. If he can get back to his usual bread and butter, which is gaining around the green, and you can see for his career, these are the best surfaces for him, and it's not particularly close. He's a loser on the greens for his career, but on Poanua, he gains nearly a half a stroke per round. Now, that has not come to fruition over the last 3 or 4 events that we've been playing him, but if he can find a way to flip that putter, as he usually does on these surfaces historically, he's going to be in line for a massive week, and he's coming in with single-digit ownership. That's really the kicker here. I mean, guys like Bubba Watson are coming in at single-digit ownership, but the difference in pedigree here is massive, right? One's a top 60 course fit, one's a top 25 course fit, and Tony Finau, when he has his best stuff, he's going to compete, if not win, every event. I mean, there was a time where this guy was finishing in the top 10, top 15, literally every single week, and I think people forget that. And DFS at $8,400, with the aggressive iron play that he has, the amount of birdies that he puts up, sure, he puts up his fair share of bogeys, that's the perfect fantasy score, and he doesn't have to win this event to pay that off. A top 10 would be more than enough. and that's what I'm hoping to get out of Tony Finau this week. That is all I've got for this week's fades and sleepers. Go ahead and let me know down in the comments before you get out of here, first off, who your biggest fade is for this week, and of course, who your biggest sleeper pick is. I always love to hear from you guys, so go ahead and let me know down in the comments. As always, going to have our DFS live stream tomorrow as well. That'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern time. I'll have a link down in the description of this video, so you can go ahead and set a reminder for that. But we'll be covering ownership, the weather for this weekend, our player pool, any of your live questions, strategy, cash contest for this weekend, you name it. Pretty much whatever you guys need to know for this weekend, whatever last second questions that you have, we'll be covering all of that for you. Throughout the weekend, we'll have our prize picks content, our showdown content as well. So make sure to keep an eye out for that. Until next time, guys, good luck with all of your lineups for this weekend, and let's get this cash.